Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Underwood and I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm also committee chairman for Troop 1607 in Statesville, North Carolina, and this is the Emergency Preparedness Merit Badge. Before we get started, you'll want to make sure that you have your Emergency Preparedness Merit Badge workbook with you, as well as the Emergency Preparedness Merit Badge pamphlet, which can be bought at any Scout shop in any location that sells Scout supplies. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this is going to be lesson 1, and there's going to be several of these videos. This is going to be a series of videos. So in lesson 1, we're going to take a look at the following requirements. We're going to do requirements 1 and 2. Requirement number 1 is earn the first aid merit badge. I've done some research on this. You don't have to have the first aid merit badge to get started on the emergency preparedness merit badge. However, you do have to have your first aid merit badge before you can consider your requirements complete. So you'll want to make sure you get that merit badge. Also, I think it's probably a good idea to have that merit badge finished before you get started, because some of the concepts that you study in first aid merit badge will help you out with your emergency preparedness. Like I said, you don't have to have it done before you get started, but it's certainly going to help you out. Requirement number 2 says do the following. It's got 3 parts. It's got an A, B, and a C. Looking at part A, discuss with your counselor the aspects of emergency preparedness, and they are prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. And it says include in your discussion the kinds of questions that are important to ask yourself as you consider each of these, and we'll go over that in just a few minutes. Part B in requirement 2 says using a chart, graph, spreadsheet, or another method approved by your counselor, demonstrate your understanding of each aspect of emergency preparedness listed in requirement 2A, prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery for 10 emergency situations from the list below. You must use the first 5 situations listed below in boldface, plus any other 5 of your choice. Discuss your findings with your counselor. And there's a list here, and we won't read through the whole list right now, but you can look at the list of the different emergency situations that they want you to do the chart for. The top 5 that you have to do are a home kitchen fire, a home basement or storage room or garage fire, an explosion in the home, an automobile accident, and a foodborne disease like food poisoning. And in a few seconds, I'm going to actually go through one of those, not one of the top 5. I'm going to go through vehicle stalled in the desert with you as an example. So I'm going to kind of give you the answer on one, so you'll see how to do your chart and everything. And then part C says meet with and teach your family how to get or build a kit, make a plan, and be informed for the situations on the chart you created for requirement 2B. Complete a family plan, then meet with your counselor and report on your family meeting. Discuss their responses and share your family plan. So you'll want to make sure that you've got notes on that in your workbook as well. You need to make sure you do that work with your family. Just please find a time to sit down with them to go over this, and that way you can truthfully talk to your counselor about the plans that you and your family made. Okay, so taking a look at the 5 components or 5 concepts here in emergency preparedness, if you will, we're going to take a look at the first one, which is prevention. I've basically got the simplified Webster's dictionary definitions here for you. We can discuss these, you can expand on them, but basically prevention is the action of stopping something from happening or arising. So when we're talking about prevention from an emergency preparedness standpoint, not everything can be prevented. Certainly you can't prevent a tornado, you can't prevent an earthquake, and there are a number of other natural disasters that you can't prevent. But there are a lot of situations that we're going to be discussing, such as a fire in the home or your vehicle breaking down in the desert, that you can take some measures to prevent that. So again, prevention is the action of stopping something from happening or arising. The next one is protection. The simple definition for protection here is a person or thing that prevents someone or something from suffering harm or injury. A good example of this would be if you know a hurricane is coming and they've issued an evacuation warning. get out of town, leave the beach, leave, even if that's your home and where you live, it might be safer to go away for a little while and then come back. That's a form of protection. Or if you think about an automobile accident, maybe some of you have been in an automobile accident, and that airbag deploys to keep you from hitting the windshield and the dashboard or other parts of the car that could potentially cause injury. That's a form of protection. Or wearing appropriate clothing for the weather, making sure that you're not in a winter coat when it's 100 degrees outside, or making sure that you're not you don't have a lot of exposed skin when it's below freezing. So those are all forms of protection that you can think about as we're looking at emergency preparedness. Mitigation simply means the action of reducing the severity, seriousness, or painfulness of something. So in mitigation, it's a little different than prevention and protection because the situation has happened. The event, the emergency has taken place, but we're looking at an action, or maybe not an action necessarily, but a way of reducing the severity, seriousness, or the amount of injury or painfulness. There again, think about the airbag. The airbag kind of mitigates how much you could be injured, because you may still be injured to some degree, but that airbag, that seat belt, different things are going to mitigate how much of an injury you get in that car accident. Or if you have a fire in your home, at this point, we're beyond prevention and protection, but we're on to mitigation. So if you have a fire extinguisher, if you have a hose you can grab, if you have some other way of putting the fire out, you can reduce the amount of damage done to your house. Of course, I wouldn't recommend standing in a burning building and putting yourself at risk if the fire is out of control and it's something the fire department definitely needs to handle. Then get out of the house. That's not what we're talking about. But if you have a stove fire and you can grab the fire extinguisher real quick, yeah, you're going to make a mess. You're going to need to clean the stove up. And I would still get the fire department there, but maybe you can put the fire out while it's still on the stove and mitigate what could have happened to your house. So going beyond that, response. We've talked a little bit about that already. Response is a reaction to something. So if you do have that fire in the home and you can grab that fire extinguisher real quick while it's still a small fire, that's a response. If your stove is on fire and you're dialing 911 on the phone to get the fire department there, that is a response. If you're with someone who falls and they get injured, they're having a heart attack, some other emergency situation, and you need the police, you need the fire, you need EMS, that's a response. And of course, there's other forms of responses that we'll talk about throughout this merit badge class as well. There's some that you might think of while you're making your chart, but just, a response is a reaction to something. And finally, moving on beyond the response, you have recovery. And this definition was a little harder. I had to kind of put a couple of definitions together. But recovery is simply the act of returning a situation to a normal state or to regain control of an event or situation. So, using the kitchen fire, your stove catches on fire, you've got a pan full of grease that catches on fire, you grab the fire extinguisher, you've got the fire out, fire department is there to check things out. So you've gone through prevention, protection, mitigation, and response. Certainly your kitchen is not normal at this point. You can imagine maybe you've got some singed cabinets, you've got a burned stove, you've got a burned pot. If you use the fire extinguisher, you've probably got some sort of powder everywhere. So you've got a mess to clean up. But the fire is out. You've got control of that situation. The fire department is there checking that out. And so now you're in the process of recovering. And as you get cleaned up, repair the stove or the kitchen or whatever the situation may be, you just move through that recovery phase. So let's take a look at this. Next couple of slides, I've got a little bit of a chart here. Like I said, we're going to look at a vehicle stalled in the desert. And we're going to move through these 5 concepts. So the first one that we're looking at is prevention. So how can you prevent your vehicle being stalled in the desert? Well, you can make sure that your vehicle is maintained properly. Maybe some of y'all haven't been in the desert. I've been in the desert before. I've been in really cold situations. I've been in really hot situations, and that's all in the desert. So I can just tell you that proper vehicle maintenance is a big deal because you're driving around North Carolina or wherever you're from, and it's your normal temperature, which summers in North Carolina can be anywhere in the 90s to 100s. Winters get down to about the mid 30s on average. So we're not talking about below freezing. We're not talking about above 100 very much. So we maintain our vehicles to stay in that range. If you're from the extreme north where it gets extremely cold, you may maintain your vehicle differently. So you'll just want to make sure that you've done some research before you even get to the desert. Make sure your vehicle is maintained properly for that situation. Make sure that you have plenty of fuel. I've been out West Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. West Texas especially, you can go several hours. You can go a few hundred miles between truck stops and gas stations. So that may not be a big deal until you look down at your fuel gauge and you realize, hey, I've got a quarter of a tank of fuel. Where's the next gas station? Well, if you're on Interstate 20, you're on Interstate 10, it may not be for 100 miles. So that could be a situation that you could find yourself in if you haven't taken steps to prevent being stalled in the desert. Also, check your fluids before driving into the desert. You may say, well, I checked my fluids and everything before I left the house, but I've driven 3 days. Now I'm driving out across the desert in one of our southwestern states. And I don't know, maybe you burned a little oil. Maybe you leaked a little oil. Maybe your coolant's just a little bit low. Those things may not sound big, but once you get in that situation, that can be huge. So that part, we're talking about prevention. We're talking about how to prevent our vehicle from stalling. So we get to protection next. So let's assume that we've already stalled, or let's assume that we're just preparing for the worst, because that's, Boy Scout motto is be prepared. So we want to kind of look at that and prepare for the worst if we need to. So you want to make sure you have sunscreen with you. If you're driving out across the desert, you may be going on vacation anyway, so maybe you've got some sunscreen, but it's not your plan to break down in the desert or to have a stalled vehicle in the desert, but not a bad idea to have some sunscreen somewhere in the car. You want to make sure that you have proper clothing with you. I've been in the desert up in the northern part of Texas where it was 112 degrees in the middle of the day. 112 degrees, you don't want to be overdressed in that situation, especially if you have a car that's broke down. The reverse of that, I was out in the desert in New Mexico one evening, spent the night out there in a truck, and when I woke, it was 98 degrees at 7 o'clock in the evening. When I woke up the next morning, there was snow on the ground. It was 32. So it really does. It's a real thing that the temperature drops in the desert overnight to freezing, and it can actually snow in the desert. Now, by 9 a.m., it's going to be gone, but it would be really harsh to be in that situation in shorts and a T-shirt if those temperatures drop. So with proper clothing, I'm saying you might want to have you a jacket and a pair of long pants and some good shoes with you just to be prepared. We're scouts. We should have a first aid kit anyway. You never know what that might come in handy for. If you're on a car trip, you probably got something to drink. Have a little extra water. Again, checking the fluids and maintaining your vehicle. Have you some extra oil and some extra coolant for your car, for your vehicle, because you never know when, that may be the situation. You're going out across the desert, you see a little steam coming out from under the hood, you've overheated, pull off on the shoulder of the road, give it an hour or two, let that engine cool down. You take the radiator cap off or the coolant fill cap and you go, oh, well, a little bit of coolant, we can be on our way. So you got some extra coolant in the car, you pour it in there, you're good to go. Whereas if you don't have that with you, you may be waiting a while for somebody to come and help you out. Another thing you have to be aware of in the desert is traffic can be sparse at times. I've actually been out in the desert in a truck, and I've driven 2 and 3 hours, and it seemed like I was the only person on the desert. So if you think, well, if I break down a shoulder, I'm just going to flag down the next motorist, it may be a while, depending on where you're at, before that next car comes along. And finally, know your route. And the reason I say know your route as a part of protection is because if you know your route, you're going to know where those truck stops, those towns, those gas stations are potentially. You should kind of plan that out. And if you know you're going to be going a long way without encountering a town or potentially population, stop and fill up. Even if you think, hey, I'm only at 3/4 of a tank, I'm at half a tank, I can make it. Probably better to stop and top off the vehicle than it is to get out there in the middle of nowhere and now it's 100 degrees and you're on the shoulder. And yeah, you're in a bad situation. So those are some ways that you can provide protection in this situation. You might think of other ways. You might have different ideas. Feel free to put those in your chart. I'm just giving you some ideas to go by. Looking at mitigation. So we want to mitigate this situation. We're now in the desert. We've prepared for the worst. We've tried some prevention, but now we're on the shoulder of the road. We've broke down and we're out in the middle of nowhere. So how do we mitigate this? Well, a lot of this is going to kind of look like protection and prevention. But you're going to, is there shade nearby? Is there somewhere you can get in the shade? Do you have a cell phone with you? If you do have a cell phone with you, do you have cell phone coverage? A lot of places in our country do have cell phone coverage, but you get out, kind of in the boondock, so to speak, and you may not have cell phone coverage. So that's something else to think about. Having water available to drink, again, you start that drive and you've got half a bottle of water and you finish that up an hour into the ride, and by hour number 3 you're sitting on the shoulder and you might get kind of thirsty, so you might want to have some extra water to drink. You don't want to get dehydrated, especially not if it's really hot. Again, have the sunscreen, proper clothing, and finally have a first aid kit. This is how you can mitigate the effects of being stalled in the desert. And like I said, yes, some of these we covered in protection. But how do you mitigate circumstances? By having those supplies and that plan in place for the protection and doing your preventive steps. So it all kind of ties in together is what I'm getting at. So finally, looking at the last two. So we're looking at response. Which, you've got a vehicle stalled in the desert. You're off on the shoulder now. You're standing outside because it's cooler standing outside. And now you need to respond. So who can you call? Do you have cell phone signal? Do you have any phone numbers written down? Do you have your Wi-Fi, your 4G? Can you get on a website and find a mechanic? Again, it may not be a bad idea. You've planned your route, your route, to have some of these numbers written down. Maybe you're part of an auto club. That would be great. Not everybody is, but if you are, can you call them? And then knowing your route, what's nearby? Are you near a town? Can you walk to a town? You may think, well, hey, I'm out here in the middle of the desert and I don't think there's anything around here. But then if you walk a 1/4 of a mile up the road, there's a little town that may have a garage in it, or at least a telephone that you can use. So know your route, know what's nearby. That kind of ties into where are you. If you're on an interstate highway, there's a mile marker every mile. So when you make that phone call, you call the tow truck. If you say, hey, I'm out here on such and such a highway and I'm broke down, they can't drive that entire highway looking for you. They're going to need to know where you're at, especially if you're Interstate 20, you're out in West Texas, you are 2 hours past Big Lake, Texas, and you can't tell them what town you've been through. Hey, I went through this town a while ago, and I think it was about 2 hours ago. Well, that doesn't mean a lot. But if you say, hey, I'm on Interstate 20 westbound, and I'm at mile marker 73, well, that tow truck's going to have a pretty good idea of where you're at, and they know how to find you. And finally, your response. Are there other immediate concerns? Do you have someone there that's got asthma? Do you have someone that's going to have a health problem? Are there already health problems? Just take a look at the situation, prioritize a list, see what needs to be fixed, and then base your personal responses and what responses you need to get happening based on your list of priorities there. Finally, recovery in this situation. you know, you got the car fixed, whatever was wrong with it, tow truck came, or you've been towed to a garage and they got you fixed, but you got the car fixed and you're back on the road. So that's recovery. You had a problem, you were prepared, you protected yourself, you mitigated the circumstances, you initiated a response, and now you're on the way to wherever you were going, problem solved, end of situation. So that's kind of, you know, making a chart like that, that's kind of what we're looking for here in this merit badge. You've got to do 10 of those. The first 5 that are in bold, you have to cover those, and then get back with your merit badge counselor on that. Finally, looking at Part C, meet with and teach your family how to get or build a kit, make a plan, and be informed for the situations on the chart you created for requirement 2B. Complete a family plan, then meet with your counselor and report on your family meeting. Discuss their responses and share your family plan. So this is a great idea. I'm glad this is a part of this merit badge. This is kind of what scouting and this merit badge is all about. It's being prepared for emergencies. Hopefully, you know, I don't know if this is your first merit badge or not. It shouldn't be. Hopefully you've already got first aid. But hopefully by this point you realize that the things you're learning in scouting, they apply to the real world. So through learning this merit badge, what you want to do is you want to take this emergency preparedness merit badge and you want to fit this to real world circumstances that can happen to you and your family. Things like a fire in the home, that can happen to anybody. Automobile accidents can happen to anybody. Floods can happen, tornadoes, earthquakes. We live, you know, quite a ways inland from the beach, and we've had to be prepared for hurricanes before. So whatever the 10 that you choose, or really whatever 5 you choose on top of the required 5, make sure you sit down with your family and get that plan together. And maybe some of y'all are getting ready to drive across the desert, and this would be a great time to sit down and prepare for that. But once you've got this plan and this kit together, make sure that you keep that together. Make sure you hang on to that, because it's a great way to be prepared for the future. And those are the first 2 requirements for Emergency Preparedness Merit Badge. Take care of those, get with your merit badge counselor, discuss them, and be prepared for Part 2. I'll be recording that in the next couple of days, and I'll get that posted for y'all. So thank y'all very much. Have a good day, and have a great time scouting.